So, Yhonnie, I'll pass over to you now. Thanks again, and thank you for organising the panel. I forgot to mention that at the beginning, that Yhonnie sort of put the group of artists and art workers together and, helped to sort of build it. So that's fantastic too. Start your timer here. Great, thank you. Yhonnie Scarce.
Okay, so sometimes I'm going to look to the screen. Doesn't mean that I'm not, I'm dismissing you guys, but it just means that I have a really close connection to my work, particularly with my family, who are going to be featured in this this artist talk. So, as Kelly mentioned earlier, I'm a Gugutha Nukunu woman from South Australia. Have been quite nomadic in terms of where I've lived in my lifetime. So I've lived Alice Springs, Hobart, Perth, Melbourne for a short time when I was a kid, here. So, and I've even, I'm here so much now, it almost seems like I live back here. So, anyway, but I wanted to introduce you to my family. They're my driving force behind my work. They're the ones that give me, I guess, the fire in my belly, particularly because my work, I guess, refers a lot to family history and my own experiences as well. And then growing up hearing stories about how strong my ancestors are. I don't say were, but they are. So here, this photo was taken in the late 1800s of my great-great-grandfather and his wife. And my great-grandmother is the beautiful young woman in the white dress in the background. That's Granny Melba. This is Granny Melba at 18. An amazing woman who produced 12 kids. So, and we only just recently found these images through a film project that my sister was working on. So I, at one point, didn't even know these existed. My great-grandfather, the real handsome one in the middle. Yeah, I think when I look at these photos too, that I think, geez, I come from a really good-looking bunch of people. Yeah, so, and particularly a really long line of strong women. So this is my grandfather, Barwell, my auntie Beverly in the background. This is my grandmother, Fanny. Notice that we all stand the same. I stand the same. We often, say that it does run in the family. My nieces do it too. So I don't know how that works, but... I never met this woman, but always knew that, you just don't mess with her. Yeah. So I've narrowed it down to a number of works, particularly that are some of my favourites. So it doesn't include the whole body of works because I do know that we are, there's a certain time frame. So this work in particular was produced during my honours year at UniSA, and it was at that time I was researching displacement of Aboriginal people and how, I could incorporate found objects. Because even though, I blow glass, I tend to incorporate a lot of found objects or other mediums. So this one has, I think 48 or 49 yams. So, not yams, bush bananas. I don't even know my work. But, so this was about containment of Aboriginal people, and particularly at that time I was researching the missions, Christian missions in South Australia. So this is the first work that my family has been featured in. This work now sits proudly at the National Gallery of Victoria. It was one of my honours work as well. So I was looking at how my family, in particular when I was growing up, dealt with a lot of racism, even though I was fair-skinned and blue-eyed, watching my mother having to deal with it, plus hearing stories about my grandfather. So this work is called Repression. And so I wanted to reference the containment. For some reason, my works have a lot of, enclosed objects or enclosed photographs. So that's sort of been, what's the word? Intuitive, I think. So each photographs in this is my grandfather at 17, my mum and her sister at 4 and 5, my mum at 17, my mother and brother. It's not all of my family, but and then there's me as a kid, a couple of them. Yeah, so I wanted to refer to that being kept away from culture and not being able to be ourselves, I guess, too. And it wasn't until because I found these by accident, these jars in an op shop, and it was my lecturer at the time, Gab Bassetto, that pointed out that the embossing on the jars has new and improved. So that happened out of nowhere. I didn't even know it when I bought them. This one seems to be a favourite of people, too. So, the looks on my mum's face, who was actually on the right-hand side. They're both grumpy in that photo. So, this is one of the projects that I worked on with the Jam Factory crew, particularly Marcel and Liam, who I worked quite closely on these domes. And at that time it was with a project called Border Plantings with the EAF next door to the Jam. So I actually asked if I could work with the associates during this project. So because the artist Alberto Barria actually was working in glass but wasn't actually a glass artist, so it seemed quite feasible for us to work with the crew next door. And this is the project that started it all, I guess, for me returning to the Jam Factory after a long stint away from there. So at that time I was accessing images of my ancestors at the South Australian Museum, of these images that were taken by Norman Tyndale for scientific purposes. So there's my great-grandfather, Willie, Granny Melba, and Grandpa Barwell. I'll go into it a little bit later about these particular images. This work's called Shackled. It was about a story that my mum had mentioned to me about being up at Andamuka Station, I think, and witnessing 4 Aboriginal men being brought in with chains around their necks and being chained to a tree for 4 days without food or water. And at that time I was thinking about the trophy system as well, because for these men to be brought in like that and to be shown off as prisoners really disgusted me. So I worked with a metal worker to produce the necklace. So it can actually, I think it can be worn, but the idea is that, that we, just to reference those men. So there's a bush banana, a bush yam, a hairy yam, and a bush plum. This is an earlier work called, my memory's bad. I worked with Tegan Epson and Karen at that time. So I can't believe I can't remember the name of this work, but the Art Gallery of South Australia bought that work. So, and at that time, I'd just recently graduated from uni, and this was shown at Tandanya And it was interesting because the public that were coming in couldn't handle it. They said that there was something wrong with me. So I am interested in morbid stuff, and the dark side. But for me, this is the truth. So for me, it wasn't that scary. So again, this particular work is called Florrie and Fanny, and it's referencing the two strong women in my life, particularly my great-grandmother and my great-great-grandmother. So both of them, one of them was, Florrie was a domestic, and I had these aprons made to fit my measurements, and I just wanted to talk about how strong these women were and how much they were putting up with as domestics. My grandmother, not so much, but she still had to hide her identity. So inside each pocket is a bush plum referencing that hidden identity, but also that strength in holding on to your culture under extreme circumstances. And I always say, if it wasn't for their courage, I wouldn't be where I am today. Or I wouldn't even know who I am, really. So I hand-stitched their names into each apron. This is called target practice. I think it pretty much speaks for itself. In 2012, I was a recipient of Melbourne Laneways Commission, and I submitted the idea of the effect of Christian missions, particularly on my family. And as far as I'm aware, they were living on Kunaba mission for about 50 years. So this was installed in Bryan Lane for 6 months. And I worked with Abbotsford Iron to produce each of the encased metal frames. So, and this work was, I think, 5.5 metres long, and they're all set in sets of 10 and then sets of 5. So it was quite long, and it would be lit at night, and then it stayed up there for most of, usually the season runs for about 3 months, but this one ran for 6 because the City of Melbourne had an Indigenous art festival that they wanted these works to be shown at. So I was, I think, one of 5 artists that was selected. Actually, 2 of them were stolen too. Yeah, they went to great lengths to get 2 of the bananas. So one of the other artists was really upset about it, but I said, they must have really wanted it. As long as the work wasn't trashed, for me it was interesting that they somehow got 2. So this is the Kunaba Mission Church. This is a cemetery, and just off in the distance, you probably, just to the lower left-hand side is my grandfather's grave and my uncle's grave. Most of my ancestors are buried in this cemetery. This is called The Collected, and this work references skeletal remains that the museums currently hold. So I can't even remember how many yams are in those boxes, but it's about that, these remains sometimes are unknown of who they belong to, but also how they're encased, and these are their coffins, really. So this is a detail shot of a work called Burial Ground that I created for Adelaide Festival a few years back, And this is one of many burial grounds that I've created referencing genocide and also the lack of acknowledgement of the deaths of Aboriginal people. So I had visited Germany a couple of years before that and realised that there's pretty much no memorials here in Australia to, or in specific sites of where major massacres had occurred. So I decided to make my own. So this work particularly has, I think, 224 pieces. This is an earlier burial ground. This is one of this is the first one I created, actually. I had just returned from Berlin. This is the install shot of the earlier image. So the Art Gallery of South Australia owns this work now. And there was this memorial that to the murdered Jewish people that really inspired this particular work. So this Perspex table as such has the same measurements of an autopsy table. And this is probably the most recent work, burial ground that I've done. It's called Blood on the Waddle. This was specially commissioned for personal structures, time, place and existence for the Venice Biennale 2 years ago. There's now a sister work that was created for Melbourne now. And again, I worked with the Jam Factory Associates on creating that work. Here there's close to 300 yams in that piece. The one for Melbourne now was, I think, 400 if I'm correct. So I worked with a young architect on this particular coffin. I'm working with Mikhail Roderick again for the Maralinga project. So I love working with other people, other creative minds, other than people, that think are probably on the same level as me in terms of, or I wouldn't even say same level, but same time, mind frame, and who I can connect with. So Mikhail's in his 20s, but he is beyond his years, I believe, in terms of how he sees architecture and his own creative practice as well. These are images that I've been able to get hold of from the South Australian Museum, taken by Norman Tyndale. And particularly I was interested, I've been able to get documents now that show his notes on how he saw Aboriginal people and who he believed was not black enough or black enough, as that's how I would see it anyway. So my whole family who were living on Kunaba Mission were subjected to this without their permission. He was particularly interested in my granny Melba for some reason. He measured her tongue, pretty much all, he did it to everyone, but there was something about what he wrote about her. He was very specific about what was going on with her body, I guess. So, and he considered her at that time to be 5/8 of an Aboriginal person. I love the look on Auntie Gladys' face. So that inspired a work at that point too about myself. So this is a self-portrait, and I'm often told that I don't look Aboriginal. I'm either white, black or other. So this work was created when I was about 38. So I installed 38 pieces from when I was supposedly born up until my 38th birthday. So I engraved those words into each of those pieces and then rubbed white paint into them. It sparked a really big interest in eugenics for me. So you guys would have seen this work next door called Not Willing to Suffocate. So it's that scientific experimentation on Aboriginal people and how it's still reflecting in today's society, with some people believing that you have to have dark skin, dark eyes and curly hair and not be Aboriginal. So the cultivation of whiteness. You guys are running out of time, so I'll try and talk a bit quicker so we can have some questions time. So. This is the work I created for the Sydney Biennale last year, and I was I was commissioned to create this work. So, so it was site-specific, and again, it was inspired by the lab or laboratory system and dissection of Aboriginal people, and that's, even in death as well. So throughout my research, I found out that there's been quite a lot of grave robbings and bodies being dissected and sent elsewhere. So I wanted to reference that morbid behaviour. So each yam and bush banana, throughout all of my work anyway, references Aboriginal culture, bodies, traditions. So throughout this work here, I've produced various colours, black, clear, a little bit purple. So just to show that all of us are subjected to some sort of interrogation about our identity at some point in our life. I can hear Gab Bassetto probably said, no sharp glass in the studio. I totally rebelled here. I know, you're in here. Yeah. And this is a recent work called The Silence of Others. And so they're 19th century domes that I found in Melbourne. And it's the whole trophy system of body parts being shipped overseas and being in private collections of whoever they are. Having human body parts is a bit weird. But, so each of the bush bananas has the number system that Tyndale used for each of my family members. So again, I've engraved that number. It's almost like tattooing these glass works. And I'm done. Yeah. Yay.
Thanks so much, Yhonnie. It's fantastic to see again just such a comprehensive body of work over all your years of making. We've got just a couple of minutes if there's a few questions. Has anyone got any questions?
Simon's brave. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's been interesting because I've been talking to a lot of people about Maralinga, and there's a lot of people that don't know what happened up there. So that particular work has been floating around in my head for a long time. So it's going to be it's going to be the biggest work I've ever created. So that's why it's been taking a while to come to fruition. And I think it's been, the opportunity to show that work at the this new festival opening in October is going to be quite significant for me too, because it's a South Australian story as well. But I'm really hoping that it's going to create discussion about not just what happened to Aboriginal people up there, but it's like the British servicemen and women, Australian servicemen and women, and it was just civilians as well that have died from the exposure to radiation. So it's going to be, I think, continued body of work. There's another one on the burner as well, or nearly finished, who I worked with Jan, Liam and Welly creating that particular work. So, and that's going to Hong Kong. So I think it's going to be something that it's not the end yet. So, because my work tends to revolve around a lot around family, and then genocide, and then maybe eugenics, and now it's Maralinga. So it all sort of links in anyway, but I tend to gravitate or hover around each subject matter. I never go through particular phases. A work always comes back to me that probably has been done before in some of my work, but then I'll just do it differently. So,
Just probably got time for one more question. So,
which one?
I won't be lazy, I'll run up.
It's going to be here in Adelaide, and it's going to be over several sites: Art Gallery of South Australia, Samstag, CAXA. So I can't speak for them, so I can only just give you a hint. Just means that you have to come back. Yeah.
So I just had a question about how you go about working with the museum to access the images and the way that you find those images and then can work with them. I just wonder how that sort of process works. Is that a kind of a collaborative process as well, or is that a process of trying to gain access to this type of information and then discovering it and working with it?
It's definitely not a collaborative process, I'll tell you that. So it's been quite difficult. Like, personally, I've found it difficult accessing that documentation, whereas other people haven't. So I don't know whether it's because whoever, is in that department likes someone more than me, but I can be a little bit bossy too, so and I demand to have access. So maybe I'm a little bit difficult to work with, who knows, but I don't care, But I want to go back and access more of of that particular documentation, but also I'm aware that there's more images there that I can't seem to get my hands on for some reason. So, yeah, we'll see what happens. No worries. Yeah.
I'm sure if you can feel free to come and talk to Yhonnie. I know there's a bunch more questions, but, come and have a chat to her. Look, I've just got a couple of conference announcements. You're right. Nick mentioned it before, but we just changed the program a little bit and brought Jeremy's talk into this cinema to enable more people to come to it. That's starting at 12:45, which is a slight change from what's in your program. So 12:45 here for Jeremy's great talk. A little reminder that the exhibition at the Sasa Gallery, which is the South Australian School of Art, that's on today, but it will be closed tomorrow. So if you want to get to see it while you're here for the conference, that's probably great to get today. And Ursula has very kindly put her hand up to take, the curator of the show, to take 2 tours over there today, one at 12 p.m. and one at 2 p.m. So you can meet just at the front of the Jam Factory doors if you'd like to go on those tours, or just wander over to the Sasa Gallery yourself. We've got Berlin glass in the hot shop. What's that? The Sasser Gallery. Can I say your best bet is if you want to just check in with Ursula in a minute, she'll direct you much better than I can. Is that okay? Oh, sorry. Okay. In the Sasser Gallery exhibition is Gabriella Bazzetto, Chris Bohar, Kirsty Ray, Jess Lachlan, the unforgettable Jess Lachlan, and Wendy Fairclough. Thanks for your help with that. So it's a beautiful exhibition. It's really just like a kind of like a block away from here in Fenn Place. There's a little, I think there's an X marked on your map, but it might be a bit tricky.
And it's next to the World's End pub.
Okay, next to the World's End pub, Jess Lachlan says, which is on Hindley Street. Okay, so we've got Berlin Glass in the hot shop. Those lucky guys have come up from winter to come and blow glass here in Adelaide on a 40-degree day. So you've got to get along and cheer them along. We've also got a really exciting thing. The Vicky Tour votes are still actually you can still vote for the Vicky Tour prize. That's an $8,000 prize to go to someone who was in the conference exhibition over at Worth Gallery. If you're a member and you haven't voted, you can fill in a vote at the registration desk. And there's some very amazing and beautiful works of art there. If you need any reminding, I'd be happy to tell you about some. No, I'm joking. And just lastly, Judith Cushman, who spoke a little before. Judith, put your hand up. She said she's going to be in the foyer. If anyone would like to talk to her about her ideas or her project, she's going to be in the foyer just after this session. Okay, thanks very much, everyone.